Welcome back to the It's Just Sport podcast paper review. I'm Joanna Reardon.
I'm Niamh. We are delighted to bring you another week of exciting news. We've had so much action in the last week, so we are here to bring it to you today. If you want to connect with us on social media, follow us on Twitter at hersport.e and at JoanneO or _OX, and on Instagram at hersport.e and at JoanneO4. So we are going to jump right into the athletics. We have had a fantastic weekend of action for Irish athletics with many making qualification standards for the European indoors. Schieffer Cleric Butner ran the second fastest 1500-meter indoor time in Irish history. She was over in Boston and she ran a time of 4:09.67, which is well inside the European indoor qualifying time of 4:13.75. She improved her personal best by over 2 seconds, and Ciara McGean is the only Irish woman to have run faster, which was last year in a time of 4:06.42. Amy O'Donoghue also competed in the 1500 metres. She was competing in Manchester and ran a time of 4:14.54. This is less than a second off the qualifying standard, so she is looking to hit the standard on her next outing. She took over 4 seconds off her personal best, which is fantastic. So she's certainly banging on the door of that qualification time. Michelle Finn was also racing the 1500 in a different part of the world yet again. So she is still competing in France in Val d'Orille. Again, I don't know how to say it. I need to get I live with someone who speaks French, so I need to ask her how to say this. Anyway, Michelle ran a personal best in 4:15.23, so she's very close again to that time. She is just off the back of a 3000-meter PB, which she ran last week, which is European indoor standard time. So it's fantastic in the 1500-meter event at the moment, and I know that you're going to give us the news on the 800-meter event as well, which has so many Irish women running it at the moment and running fantastic times.
Yeah, 800 meters is like the race to be at if you want like Irish interest, like 2.0. Like it's insane. So obviously we've spoken about the incredible Nadia Power and everything that she's managed to achieve so far this year. Like it's the 16th of February, and I think Nadia has achieved more than all of us in our lifetimes. And that's no disrespect to anyone in their lifetimes, but like she's on fire. So at the weekend, Nadia won the 800 meter at the IFAM meet in Belgium. She blitzed her way to victory with the second fastest time of her indoor career, running 2:02.83. She finished nearly a second ahead of Germany's Tanja Spiel in second. But next up for Nadia Power is the 800 meters at the World Indoor Tour in Poland, before her attention will turn to the European Indoor Athletic Championships, which will take place at the same venue from the 5th to the 7th of March. So that should be really exciting. It should be something we should all be looking forward to, because just what she's doing at the minute is incredible. But it's not just Nadia. Iseult O'Donnell, she ran an 800-meter personal best of 2:03.27 in France at the weekend as well. Her time is well within the qualifying standard for the European Indoor Championships, which sits at the minute at 2:03.85. So Nadia Power is the only Irish athlete who is ahead of her in the rankings at the minute. It's been a monumental rise for O'Donnell, who surprised the athletics community last summer when she won gold in the 800 meter at the national championships. And she also picked up silver in the 1500 meters as well. But O'Donnell had taken a massive hiatus from competitive running, and she's actually only returned to the sport recently. So it's great to see people who have basically not been involved in athletics come back and still maintain their main peak performance. It's just unreal what's going on with the 800 meters in athletics at the minute. Like, it's crazy. I know you want to dash us back to Manchester. So who was running in Manchester?
Yeah, so Manchester, there were 4 Irish athletes competing in the same race in the 800 metres. So the Irish athletes actually took from second to fifth place, showing the depth of middle distance running in Ireland. Louise Shanahan finished second in a time of 2:03.52, which was a qualifying standard for the European indoors. And she was followed by Katie Kirk in a time of 2:04.09, which is not too far from the qualifying standard. Ciara McGean followed up in fourth, and Georgie Hardigan, who is now eligible to run for Ireland, finished in fifth. If you want to check out some of the action, head over to hersport.e to see some of the races. We have a full report on the racing that happened over the weekend, information on the qualifying standards, and also some video clips of the racing. So there's certainly ones to check out and find out more.
I'm literally just thinking, like, I was watching Michelle Finn do like her race because, like, to Hollowaboo. I'm literally from her same region, guys. That's why I'm obsessed with her. And they had like these like little like smoke machines coming out like at the side as she was like sprinting past them. And I was literally like, why don't we line the streets of like Castle Wagner, which is like where she's from, with these like things? I have no idea. If Cork County Council are interested, I'm all for it. But we're going to delve over to Camogie news, because in Camogie during the week, we had a huge announcement because the 2020 Camogie Players Player of the Year nominees were announced. So Kilkenny's Camogie All-Ireland conquering champions Denise Gall and Grace Walsh have been nominated alongside Galway's Shauna Healy for the 2020 Camogie Players Player of the Year award. In the intermediate grade, Downs, Niamh Mallon and Sarah Louise Griffin and Maeve Kelly of Antrim have been nominated for that Players Player award. While Ciara Donnelly and Leanne Donnelly, both representing Armagh, and Roisin O'Keefe are in the mix for the Junior Players Player award. It is very hard to say Players Player. If the Camogie Association PR people are listening, like Players Player is very hard. But best of luck to all the girls anyway.
The voting for Players Player of the Year award is now underway among inter-county players, and the winners alongside the All-Star teams will be announced on the 17th annual Camogie All-Star Awards, which will be held as a virtual event on Saturday, March 6th. We are heading over to soccer now. So the rumours are true. Saoirse Noonan has confirmed her move to Shelbourne from Cork City.
I'm very sad. I just need to have a breather. Not that I thought Saoirse Noonan would be rebels till I die, and I would never place that expectation upon her. Absolutely, she has every right to go towards her international career. I'm still just sad because I'm going to miss those soccer-filled goals in GA, and people are getting a little bit upset about them. But Saoirse Noonan has committed to soccer, I suppose, for the foreseeable future, and good for her. Vera Powell basically said last year that she's well in contention. Just if maybe it's the minor things that she's missing out on when she's dedicating her time to both sports. But she's obviously hoping to make that breakthrough on the international scene for Ireland. She was very close last year. She was on the panel actually for the Germany game. She just didn't make it kind of to the end. I suppose Gaelic football, unfortunately, again, is going to take a back seat now for Saoirse because she's in Dublin obviously full time. She still said in an interview that she has an ambition of winning an All-Ireland anyways with Cork. But I hope she does it. But a part of me thinks there's more possible things you can achieve in soccer. She could go, to the Premier League if all goes well for her. She could do, such amazing things in soccer if she decided to 100% commit to that, because what we need as an international team and what teams would need at the minute is a forward that can hold up play, but also be physical enough to get through defenses and score amazing goals, which Saoirse obviously can do. So even though I'm sad, we do wish her all the best, Saoirse. If you want to come back, I'll be here, open arms, happy out. No bother to bring you back into Cork football. But I do wish her all the best in everything that she does. She's going to be incredible no matter what she does. But you've got some big news coming from government restrictions, particularly with the GAA and the LGFA and Camogie Association.
Yeah, so I think most people in sport have heard the news. I mean, anyone that watches any news should have heard this by now, but the Ladies Gaelic Football Association, the Camogie Association and the GAA have confirmed that inter-county training and competition lost its elite status as per the COVID restrictions. So government representatives met with Gaelic Games governing bodies and clarified that inter-county activity is not covered under the current level 5 exemptions for elite sports. As such, return to inter-county training or games is not permitted under the current restrictions. It was understood that the inter-county training was unlikely to resume until after Easter. Taoiseach Micheál Martin then came out and said that inter-county training is possibly going to resume before the end of April. I quote, "In the context of revising of the Living with COVID plan, we look at sport and look at inter-county GAA." Martin said of the plan due to be released in 2 weeks' time. So I know everybody's going to be sitting there, waiting to see what's going to come of that. And I guess that brings us on to what does COVID mean for sport? I know a lot of people in GAA and in hurling and camogie are going to be disappointed at that news, but off the back of last year, they got quite an opportunity to play, when other sports didn't necessarily go ahead. So it's certainly I think disappointing for them at the moment, but it's been disappointing for everybody else since. Lots of people haven't competed since March last year or earlier. Depending on the sport that you were in. So you look at Rowing Ireland, they have announced their commitment for the Irish Rowing Championships going ahead. They announced that on the 29th of January, and the AGM is on Wednesday, 17th of February. So hopefully we'll know more following this. You go to Athletics Ireland and they cancelled the National Indoor Irish Championships, which really disappointed a lot of people. they have secured government approval for an indoor micro meet to take place this weekend, and that's going to be for specific, like it's an invitation only event, and that's going to go ahead at the Sport Ireland campus at the indoor arena this weekend, and it's for people that are aiming to compete and make qualification standard for European indoors. So obviously we have a few people that have made the standard, but it's a few people that are like Amy O'Donoghue is probably going to be there looking to make that standard, and a couple of other people will be looking to make those times. And then anybody that's on track for Tokyo, so people that are trying to get those qualification standard or get rankings for Tokyo, will also be invited to compete there. But other than that, I mean, that's kind of all I've heard at the moment. Have you heard anything else in the grapevine with other sports on what the situation is?
Yeah, so I suppose I just kind of want to go back to GA just for a few seconds there. So basically, I think the reason the frustration is there among the GA community at the minute is that when the initial plan was brought out, way back when with living with COVID, say lockdown 1 had finished, I think the assumption was there that the GA was going to be under elite status forever under the living with COVID plan. So I think that's where the frustration kind of did exist. I know I can remember last year when they had announced that they were going to do club first. I have predicted, I'm going to say, that there would be a COVID outbreak in certain areas simply because I just don't understand how that large volume of people were able to move for quite a long time without having any COVID outbreaks. And the only outbreaks that actually happened were ironically from people going to house parties or different celebrations when county finals were won. So people who were not involved with the team themselves coming into a team environment and then spreading COVID in that way. That's what I'm trying to say. So that was a bit weird for me when I initially kind of thought, are we really going to go back to the club scene again in order to kind of go first? Is that a case that the GA can handle? You know, it was outside GA grounds technically when COVID was kind of picked up. And then it had a knock-on effect for intercounty. We saw Sligo County Board pulled out their own team in the men's game because Sligo had an outbreak. Now the Sligo players actually wanted to play because they felt they had enough players to do it who were healthy and also didn't have COVID, which was key there. Donegal were the first team to have had an outbreak. They had a meeting of some sorts and someone came in with COVID. Their county final got cancelled, so they now have to wait until Easter. Will that happen? I don't know. Cork's county final is also postponed. And I think basically aside from that, it was Donegal, it was Tyrone, and another few teams who basically had an outbreak. So they were teams with a large volume of people traveling, like dotted around the country, like going from work, you know, and stuff like that. Obviously, we had the controversy as well of Cork GA, Cork football manager Ronan McCarthy, having a training session on the beach when everyone was living in level 5 restrictions, which was very frustrating. And then I suppose you had I'm going to say the audacity, and I mean this even as a GA supporter, you had the audacity of the Cork County Board and the Down County Board, who are also caught having a training session, turned back to the GA and say, we see your ban because we did wrong, but we're going to appeal your ban. Now, if anything screamed arrogance in that moment, when everyone is suffering and everyone is on a level 5 lockdown, that is not what you need to see. Like, I did not need to see Ronan McCarthy's face and the Down manager's face on my paper telling me we're going to appeal the ban because we don't feel we feel it's too harsh. You broke the rules. You actually broke the law. Legally, you broke the law. And you still have the audacity to come back and say, no, actually, we're going to appeal this. So a part of me thinks that a relationship might have been like soured. Maybe the image that the GA was putting out at the minute was not a good image. It felt very, we're above you and that's disrespectful, but who cares? Now, I'm not saying that's the GA motto entirely. It's not. That was just the image portrayed by Cork and Down in that moment. And I think people were just fed up. And then I saw some like really stupid articles basically like coming out of, you know, GA people saying, oh, well, League of Ireland gets to go ahead and, you know, the Women's National League gets to go ahead. Why can't we get to go ahead? We're just as elite as Shamrock Rovers and anyone else like that. No one had said that. I think the problem is that there was an arrogance put forward where the GA felt that they were going to be elite for a long time and they never bothered to ask the question in January, well, are we possibly going to continue when things we're in the height of it? Sure, nobody could have expected the cases were going to rise. Nobody could have foreseen the deaths. Nobody could have foreseen any of that. But I think just to not be able to have a communication and go back to government and say, this is it. Now, I could be wrong. The GA might have gone back to the government and have said that and may not have got any correspondence back. I don't know for sure. If that's the case, that's the question that lies on government, and that's something that needs to be answered ASAP. Because if they can't even communicate to the GA, oh, you're not elite anymore, how can they communicate a living with COVID plan with the rest of the country? That kind of thing. But as you said, Gaelic Games weren't obviously, they're not the only ones to be disappointed. We had swimming cancelled. Ellen Keane is a Paralympic athlete and she wants to go to the Paralympics. She had to swim in her backyard in a blow-up pool. We had rowing, as you said, kayaking, athletics. We had so many different teams that couldn't do anything. Basketball Ireland is another one. And I think as well, if you looked at who was on the board in terms of COVID and sport recognition, the thing that jumps out the most is that only the top 3 sports, let's call them, were represented. So I'm talking soccer, GA, and rugby. They were the only 3 that were kind of on the panel. There was no one really talking about the lesser man or the lower sports down at the bottom that people also want to participate. I know basketball, we're told, yeah, you can go in and work out, but don't touch the ball.
How's that going to work? Yeah,
that's not going to do anything. But I think it is disappointing. I think the GA obviously did pretty well to get their elite status for last year. I think communication was terrible. I think the arrogance portrayed by Cork and Down is just astonishing, and I think it is an insult to all the other international athletes who are wanting to develop for Tokyo, for whatever international tournament is coming up, the Euros, whatever it may be. And I think maybe just conversation needs to be better. And I think the image as a sports person you put out from the GA has to be better as well.
I think, to be honest, a lot of people felt that Gaelic Games managed to go ahead last year because of the government investment. And this is, people outside the GA community, I think, felt a bit hard done by in the fact that there was such a monetary investment went into Gaelic Games, and that's why it went ahead. I'm not saying this is true or false, but that's definitely some feelings that were coming from other sports. And personally, I would think that it's very difficult for international sports. We have to be realistic and say that Gaelic Games happens in Ireland, and we're looking to send athletes to do well on the international stage. And there have been athletes that haven't been able, you've mentioned Ellen Keane, that have not been able to race, have not been able to do different competitions, to train, they've been out of it. And then to sit there and see that Gaelic Games was able to go ahead. The club scene last year, disaster. I think that was wrong. I don't know how they saw that, or didn't foresee that something was going to happen. I think that this would be my gut feeling from being involved in rowing, that one of the main reasons that rowing didn't go ahead was not actually to do with, yes, the 200 people max, that was a problem. And I think that having a championships last year, I know that they're looking at it differently for this year, that they might split it over a couple of weekends like athletics did last year. But in rowing and in a lot of other sports, your kind of celebration after the championships, your national championships, is a big thing. And I think that they were quite cautious in that, having everybody come down to Cork to race, that they were actually, part of me feels they were trying to prevent a celebration after. The inter-county piece, it splits people because they're coming from different clubs. So if you have your players come to the match, play the game, and go back to different parts of the county, if you have someone from Athy, you have someone from Maynooth, you have someone from wherever playing for Kildare, they're actually all just going home. Do you know what I mean? And if you can control your players, that's one thing. Revoke, I don't know, did they win or lose? I don't even know. But they went and everybody was, celebrating together. So if it goes back to a community, then you have your problem, because someone's going to say, oh, we'll have it in the club, or we'll have this, or we'll have that, and whatever. And it was rampant around Revoke. And that's not the only place that it happened. It happened in loads of places. So I think the club thing, personally, I think the GA should have controlled that a bit more. And I think other sports maybe foresaw that a little bit with their national championships. But you're allowing inter-county play, and national championships didn't go ahead. And for a lot of the national championships, there's qualifying standards. So if you go to swimming and if you go to athletics, you have to meet a qualifying standard to compete at that national championships in the first place. It's not the same with all sports. With rowing, it is not a qualifying time or a qualifying standard. You enter and that's it. You do well or you don't do well. But some sports, there are qualifying standards. And when you're trying to develop the sports to send people abroad to race, I think the next few years we may see repercussions depending on what happens with the national governing bodies and what happens with the racing. Because athletics were very lucky that they got some racing last year. And I know in the athletics community that there are people that are a bit disappointed and confused. And what are we training for? What's going to happen in 2021 with the indoor championships being pulled? And then something was pulled in the UK as well. Like people are wondering, like, what is the situation going to be for us for the next few months? Like, what are we training for? And my fear is your young athletes. Like if you have people that are on the brink, if you have people coming up from say 16, 17, 18, and they're actually doing well and you haven't got a place for them to race, and if you allow them walk away from the sport and you don't give them something to compete for, we may not see Olympians in 2024. That could be the problem. And like, again, it's that I think we need to look at it as a nation, and the NGBs need to really come together and try and come up with something for people to compete in. Like I know they're trying to come up with different ideas all the time and like trying to keep people occupied. Maybe being a little bit more open with their plans. Like I think it's good that Rowing Ireland have come out and said like we are committed to it. Do I feel that that's something that's definitely going to go ahead? No. Like honestly, I'm not sure it's going to go ahead. If the organizations were a bit more open with their athletes and said, okay, this is plan A. So plan A is that it, hypothetically runs as normal, which isn't going to happen. Plan B is we run it over X amount of weekends. Plan C is, I don't know what plan C could be. And then plan D is it's off. And that's just the way it is. And we can't be naive in thinking that a lot of the competitions may not go ahead. And maybe some of them you have to do them at reduced capacity. So if you didn't have qualification standards before, introduce qualification standards or head-to-head racing or something. But like I think what some of the sports found very difficult, and I know Philip Doyle had put something out before, it was demonstrating club sports, like team sports, sorry, where people are tackling each other, breathing on each other, all this. And then there was like a tick, like the government said, yes, let's go ahead. And then like it was literally a single skull. So like one person in a boat by themselves, not able to go ahead. So, in a boat, like in kayaking, in rowing, like you're not breathing on your competitors. Like it can actually be quite well maintained. So I think that's where some of the people found it very difficult to kind of accept the GA ruling from last year. So I think other people are not necessarily surprised. People outside the Gaelic Games community aren't necessarily surprised that it's not going ahead and feel that maybe that could have been the decision from last year. But I think definitely when we're looking forward, we have to consider that although they might be considered smaller sports or minority sports, they're your Olympic sports. They are your sports that your athletes are representing Ireland on the international stage. And, I know you're saying about the League of Ireland piece. The League of Ireland, it's 10 teams for male, 10 teams for female. So there's more control on that. You're not having, 4 teams from each county come out of huge panels and everything. And they are actually potential international athletes. So if you want to see Ireland do well in the soccer scene in a few years, I'm sorry, that for me would be a priority. It's not necessarily going to be a popular opinion. I know a lot of people are, may not understand my thought process behind it. But for me, if you want to see Ireland do well on an international stage and you want to be watching those soccer games and you want to be saying Ireland's a great team and see that, you actually have to let those games go ahead over your Gaelic Games. For me, it was brilliant last year that they were able to go ahead and it was entertaining it was uplifting and entertaining from a spectator and a consumer point of view. But it's certainly going to be a difficult one, I think, when it comes to international sports and not allowing those that go ahead, and then people pushing for Gaelic Games to go ahead. But I think there's a lot of
I was going to say, can I literally just interject on one thing as well about the GA? So last year when it all kind of not kicked off, but when the GA were kind of given the go ahead, I basically said to my editor in the Times that I was going to do a piece where I followed just my own club, basically to see how they get on with like COVID standards, and things like that. I just wanted to see it like for myself because I was a bit skeptical. I was a bit like you. I was a bit like, there's no way, like they're 100% like compliant. Like they're all amateurs. You can't get them to be in a bubble. Like they all have to work at some point.
That's the problem. What you're saying is the bubble piece is the problem because people have to go to work, and some of the international athletes actually will make the decision to step back and say, whether they're working or not working, in a team. Like that's what we're like. That's the problem with the rugby, is they're not professional, so they're struggling with that. So when they're looking to represent their country on international level, maybe some of them will decide, like, yes, I'm going to step back from work to continue my sport. But there's no way that can happen in Gaelic Games when you have such a volume of people participating in it.
Well, I was just going to literally say about like the club. So I follow Killarney Legion, which would be, my club, and they're both men and women's. So basically they're set up. Okay, I know I just ranted about Cork GA and I know I just ranted about Down GA, but I'm going to have to also throw in the positives that the clubs were doing as well, because a lot of them were doing incredible stuff. So they had one of their coaches, he has respiratory problems, I think, in general. So they were a bit nervous about going back. They didn't know kind of what the crack was and different things like that. So basically the way that they did it with their club was they all signed up to the GA COVID app. So you register your symptoms, and they were, told if you don't register your symptoms, you're not playing. Like, it's as simple as that. So they were told register their symptoms. They did that. Any of them who were coming to training, they had to undergo obviously temperature tests and different things like that, and basically say, yeah, I'm feeling okay. Yeah, doing this. Yeah, I'm doing that. They obviously went ahead with their training sessions. They had the sports science studies done that proved that outdoor participation, so 15 versus 15, tackling, sweating, breathing, all the stuff that you're saying, that is fine because the outdoor air actually dissipated like the virus essentially. So that was basically the reason, that was the sports science reason that they were allowed to go ahead, whereas it travels more prominently in indoors, which I think Christmas proved that in itself. They basically had an isolation room. So if a player did feel ill or just happened to come in and wasn't feeling himself, they were put into an isolation room. A doctor was called, along with a swab test that they themselves would have to pay for. So I know the GA does get a bad rap, and I know different things obviously are coming out of it, but the clubs themselves did absolutely monster work in order to make sure that club season went ahead. So I think the point that I'm trying to make here is that, yes, we obviously have to focus on our international athletes. Yes, all these things are obviously problems at the minute, but that also shouldn't take away from the clubs, the Killarney Legions, the Mill Streets, the Minutes, the Atties, the Mullingar Shamrocks, whoever that may be, the Kilcars, the Killybegs, whatever it is. It shouldn't take away from the hard work that they did in order to make sure that the virus
be compliant
didn't get in, and I think that has to be acknowledged too. But the GA did their best. They did their hard work.
That happened across the board though, and it wasn't just the GA clubs that were compliant. Like, you look around at, like, I know in Denora Harriers that they were they were doing temperature checks as well. I know that they were very good in making sure that everything during the different phases was the rules were run by. I know within their own clubs that there were booking systems put in place for both. There was X amount of people laid down in the club at periods of time. Everything had to be cleaned. There was like tracking on who used what boats, who used what equipment, like tagging and all this kind of different systems. And at some points, one person was allowed to row in a boat, or if you lived with a household member, you could be in a boat with them. And after that, when the rules allowed, people were allowed to be in boats together. But what you're saying is that the breathing and the sweating and all that isn't an issue. Okay, fine. But how come they got to go ahead and other sports didn't? And I'm not faulting the GAA in that they actually went ahead with some of the stuff. The club stuff, I think you have to, the actual on pitch time is one thing. Traveling to games, I know changing rooms a lot of the time were closed, but there are things that you can't get around, and you have to trust everyone to follow the rules. And the problem with, I think, the Gaelic Games side of things is the volume of people is huge. And even for us, like things weren't even broken down into communities. Like, we weren't even allowed, as rowers, we weren't even allowed to race each other on our training grounds. Like, there's like 4 or 5 clubs that you could actually launch from your own club's premises, row to a certain place, start there and race. That wasn't allowed. It didn't go ahead. And I'm not saying that the Gaelic Games were proactive, I guess, in allowing things to go ahead. Do I think other organisations stood back and erred on the side of caution? Yes, absolutely I do. I think that there were some situations where sports should have or could have gone ahead. It's getting creative, thinking outside the box, that type of thing. But I think, like what I was saying earlier in relation to the piece on, I think part of the organisations, the NGBs, maybe saying we're not going to run a championships was at the time identifying that potential celebrations after was going to be a risk. because depending on what part of the country it's typically run in or whatever it is, like, is everybody going home? Where are they staying? Like all that kind of thing. And that just comes part and parcel with it. So you can't just isolate the actual competition. You have to think of the bigger picture, and like realistically, we're talking about something that has impacted the entire world. And like, how are we going to responsibly allow sport to continue? I think like the difficulty now is trying to get people back to sport. I wholeheartedly want to see sport. I want to race. I want to compete. Like it's so difficult for people that are, training and feel like they're training for nothing, and the communication isn't there from the government. Not mind the NGBs. Like the NGBs have difficulty because they're not getting communication with the government. So then the NGBs can't communicate with the athletes. So it's very difficult for people all around. Again, my priority would be the people that are potentially going to compete internationally. You need to keep that development going. This is just a question to you, and maybe other people have opinions on it. We're talking about national championships. National championships were blocked. Like we're called off. Like there's a handful of national championships that went ahead. We saw cycling go ahead. We saw athletics go ahead. What is the difference between national championships and intercounty playing? Like national championships is typically a once-off event. You have everybody show up in the day, they compete, whatever it is. And like we're saying, some of it has to be qualification standards. To get to your national championship final and some of the team sports, you have to go through quite a process to get there. So what puts Gaelic Games ahead of some of the other sports that didn't get national championships? Like we're talking national championships. Do you know what I mean? Like some of these national championships like didn't go ahead for like wars. Like that's what we're talking about. Like the only reasons that they didn't go ahead before was for wars. So how can we justify allowing Gaelic Games to go ahead? And then you have people, and like I'm saying, some of the standards, you have to make qualification standards. So you have to be good enough to compete in the first place. So how come? That's just a question like that. I think some people struggle in those other sports, and you're saying some of those sports aren't even getting a seat at the table. Gaelic Games, rugby and soccer are getting a seat at the table. They're all team sports, and they're getting to go ahead in some scenarios. And then your sports that actually seem controllable when it comes down to it, even to just run localized events or to figure out some way of managing competition, didn't get to go ahead. So I think like that was the problem with last year. So it's now looking forward to this year. Like, will we see more?
Yeah, like my basic thing that I would basically say back to all the people who are saying, why is it the GA or the GA ahead all the time, is a part of me kind of thinks, why are you, and I don't mean you, but like, why are you vilifying the GA to get your sport put back on? Why, like, you know what I mean? Like, that's kind of my like view of it, just as someone who's involved in GA and in soccer as well. Like, a part of me just kind of thinks, should the onus not be on, I'm not saying on the NGBs, because I don't think that's fair, but should the onus also not be on government to understand that if GA could possibly go ahead, then surely be to God these other sports can go ahead. Like, there's no need to be vilifying and pitting other sports against each other, which is unfortunately what has happened with the way these restrictions have all kind of played out. And I think like a part of me would just kind of just think to myself, like, you know, surely there's a way that the government can orchestrate and open up sports in a safe and environment way. Maybe not for, because I totally agree what you're saying in terms of like traveling and in terms of championship celebrations and different things like that. But when do the sporting organizations themselves not be held responsible anymore for what goes on outside of the field? So like, is it like a 2 hour after the game, 2 hours before and 2 hours after? Yeah. So like, where's like the cutoff point? Is it on the county grounds in particular, you know, where all these events are going in? Like if I'm at a Legion Dingle game, which I was for an example, if I caught COVID, I was in GA grounds. So obviously the GA are responsible for me. But let's pretend you were also you weren't, but just pretend you were also there. You were standing outside the GA grounds on a ladder looking in with 6 other people around you. You catch COVID. Who's responsible there? Like that, they're the questions that I would basically have, you know, when the government are kind of announcing all these things as an NGB. You know, if John needs a drive because he's 18 and unfortunately didn't get his license and he needs his mom to bring him and he gets COVID because his mom had COVID from work and he brings it into the pitch, whose fault is that? You know, are the GA responsible for that? Are Rowing Ireland responsible for that? You know what I mean? So there's so many different ways that you can kind of look at it. And I totally agree. Like, I don't have all the answers, absolutely. But a part of me would kind of say, why would you be in a position, why would you try to, I know the GA are arrogant. I know the GA have a bit of a, like, an image about them that they control all and different things like that. But the truth is, and I mean, we've seen with the announcement of the current living with COVID plan, they clearly don't control on if they're not even going to be considered elite at a time when they were considered elite literally up until 2-3 weeks ago. So I think, like, my question would be to the government and to all the other NGBs, how come you're shifting the blame to the GA? Like, are you trying to, as you were saying, like, trying to hide the fact you just didn't go ahead with your thing because you didn't trust your members to be COVID safe, or because you didn't have the facilities or different things like that? So I would prefer, now I'm not saying all the NGVs have done that, I'm saying, like, the fans of these sports have, like, done that respectively. So a part of me would just kind of, you know, question it from, like, that point of view more than anything else. But I think, like, overall, like, I think they have proved that the GA could go ahead, take the club and the dramatics that happened with the county finals.
I think it's very hard to run the club scene, as we discussed, because when something is in a community, and I think that's part of what it is with the GA, is that because it's so community heavy, it is very difficult to control what people are going to do. And I understand what you're saying about outside the actual grounds and celebrations and all that kind of thing. But I think does it come down to the government? Do the government need to get more involved and say, yes, this can go ahead, or it can't? But again, like, what we're saying is there was a huge investment from the government into Gaelic Games. Do you know what I mean? They weren't investing into other sports. And that's what a lot of the other sports, the smaller and minority sports, feel that, oh, well, you had to let Gaelic Games go ahead because you invested X amount of million into them. So of course you were going to let it go ahead. And that's what the other people feel. It's kind of, I feel like Ireland does this. The government is doing this anyway the whole time. They're appealing to the masses. And that's what they're going to do. They gave the financial investment, and they're able to keep a lot of people happy with the Gaelic Games because there's so many people involved. So when you go to the smaller sports, they have less people to give out about it. You're leaving it in the hands of the NGBs to do it, to make the decisions. Like, I think, I don't know what the right answer is. I just think it's very difficult to stand, and I don't think it's a matter of vilifying them. I think maybe the government needs to be held more accountable for being clearer with the restrictions. I know they just cut everyone across the board this time around. You're not allowed to participate in sport. At least they covered everybody. Like, there's other sports that think, yes, we could have managed with it, and there are sports that could have done okay in this lockdown and competed, or sorry, not competed, but trained. Like, nobody's allowed to train at the moment, you know, unless you're literally by yourself at home, or, you know, whatever it might be, outdoors. But I think just a lot of the other athletes feel hard done by, and the primary reason is kind of why was Gaelic Games allowed to go ahead last year, and they're not surprised that it's not going ahead this year, and people think that, oh, well, you know, the government investment's not there, so is that why it's not allowed to go ahead now? But I think we could go on about this for quite some time. I think, like you're saying, it is important to think of the positives. Again, I do think the games, the intercounty games, intercounty for me, I think you can control it. I think that can be controlled. The club for me is a bit much, particularly when you're not allowing other sports to go ahead. And I do think that some of the NGBs erred on the side of caution. I'm not saying that was the right decision or wrong decision. I think there were some events that could have gone ahead last year that didn't. And you're going to struggle. Memberships are going to plummet in sports. And clubs, how are your clubs going to stay sustainable if you've got no members? So, like, people even felt this year, like, what are you paying membership for? Like, honestly, like, if I was in Athletics Ireland, Rowing Ireland, somewhere, like, what would I be paying my membership for this year at all? Because I'm not doing nothing, you know. And what would you be paying your club membership for if you're not going to be in the club for half the year? And then how do the club survive? So it's a vicious circle. It's very difficult. I think the clubs are going to suffer. I think you're going to see athletes walk away from sport. If you're not giving people something to do, like at least kind of running, you can kind of some of those virtual runs and that type of thing. I know I mentioned last week that Rowing Ireland are doing like a row with the pros. So they've had like Claire Lamb was on last week. She'll be on this week doing ergometer sessions. We don't row to erg. No, thank you. Like, none of us want to be sitting on an indoor rowing machine. So like they're getting creative to keep people involved. They're trying to pull in, you know, the former elite athletes and some current elite athletes to keep people motivated. I know it's happening in other sports where they're doing talks, they're doing competitions. Some Ireland are doing Ireland's Smartest Family, like that kind of stuff. Like they are trying, but like there's nothing like actually competing. So if this continues to go on through the summer, I think we'll have a problem. I think people might have sucked up one year, but I know a lot of people found this lockdown a lot harder than the other lockdowns. I know it's been, novelty has worn off, people aren't as optimistic that stuff's going to go ahead. It's been dark, it's been wet, it's been cold. We don't love that kind of thing. So I think people are looking forward to the summer. But I mean, look, tell us about what's been going on to anyone that's listening in relation to your team, your motivation. How have you stayed motivated? It's been very difficult for athletes participating in organised sport to stay interested in training without knowing if there's competitions on the horizon. So what's happened in your club, or what has your sporting organisation done to keep you interested? And that's what we'd like to know. And we'll start off next week with some more positive news on what people are doing, because I know it's very easy to get pulled into this sadness, really. But again, all the things that we've discussed, realistically, I'm just going to mention the bigger picture. There's been a lot of people sick. I know a couple of weeks ago it was 1 in 67 in Ireland. So it's certainly, probably 1 in 62 or 1 in 64 now. There's people that have died. Sport, it is a game. A lot of people have dedicated their lives to it. Those people that are, again, on the brink or currently competing at international, like there are people that are professional sports people. I think they should be allowed to continue if they're professional. And anyway, we won't get too far into it anymore. But the bigger picture is it has grasped the world, and we as a nation need to be responsible, whether sports are going ahead or not going ahead or whatever the story may be. We do need to try and conduct ourselves. And it's again, the fans that wrecked the club games last year, that's irresponsible. That's not thinking of the bigger picture. And it's just if it's the players that have been responsible and have done their best, it's actually them that suffer. The fans and the communities and stuff, they should have had the cop on and the respect for the whole country, to think of the bigger picture in that scenario. So let's go with some positive news next week. And we'll hear the positive things that people have been doing. How have you stayed motivated? But have you any final words?
No, I literally agree with everything you said. I think you're dead right. I think the people who have unfortunately brought us into this position through either bad governance or lack of respect for the rules or different things like that. Unfortunately, this is the scenario now that we all find ourselves in. As you said earlier, we have to keep motivated. Like, we actually have to get going. I was laughing because as you were talking about things being wet and cold, a massive sun shower just came across like Mill Street, and I was looking outside. I was like, yeah, I can see why people are sad. But no, I think overall, and not to sound like a culture, the evenings are getting longer, the days are getting brighter. There is better stuff hopefully coming ahead, and fingers crossed, we all can understand that we have to stick by the rules if we want all these things to come back. You're right. It is just sport that we're talking about. There is greater things in life. I absolutely understand that too. On a bonus news today, my grandmother got her second vaccine today, literally like an hour ago. That was the message that pinged into my phone. So she's going to be hitting a nightclub at the age of 89 and matches before myself and Niamh. So if my grandmother wants to be on the podcast, I'm going to have to let her have hosting duties over us. She's the only one who can go to things. But no, fingers crossed, there are brighter things ahead, and it will be better anyways. And
maybe we'll have to do some virtual events ourselves. Maybe we'll have to. It's something that we had considered. I think in the second lockdown, just something that didn't materialize at the time. So maybe we could look at hosting some virtual events. I know people don't love the Zoom quizzes, but maybe we could make a fun quiz. Maybe we could have a virtual run or some other virtual challenges. So we will head to the drawing board on that one. But I think that rounds us out for the day. Social media, give us a follow. Let us know what your thoughts are. Please don't be, targeting each other or scrapping on our social media channels. Everyone is just trying to do their best. We do want to hear what your experiences have been, but don't get in fights, please. We're all just trying to stay positive. But
Shakira was right. No fighting. No
fighting. All right, we'll leave it at that. Good to talk to you, and we will check in again next week.
Cheerio.